Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining my webinar about creating recorded webinars. This is a great beginner session for folks who've never created webinars before and are interested in creating one. My name is Lily, and I have a background in journalism, UX, and instructional design. What I do is help small business owners and mission-driven individuals transfer their knowledge into online learning materials. My passion is designing effective and successful online learning experiences, including creating webinars, which is our today's topic. Creating webinars is a skill anyone can learn how to do. It has a couple of phases, but manageable steps that require careful planning and preparation. And the final phase of production is where it all comes together. And as with everything, practice makes perfect. If you're new to shooting videos, the more you are in front of the camera, the more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Nowadays, there are many webinars available online. We all have so much to choose from. But just because there are a lot of webinars out there, it doesn't mean that they're all good. Actually, the majority is bad. But we still need good quality webinars. Your audience still needs your expertise and wisdom. What helps us personally with the choice of webinars is the length of the webinar. And let's be honest, it's hard to sit through a 1-hour webinar. The person speaking, are they clear, straightforward, trustworthy, interesting? And most importantly, was it useful and worth our time? In this session, we'll go over the basics. We'll define what is a webinar. We hear this term a lot, and there are many definitions floating out there. So we'll clarify what specifically we'll be talking about in this session. We'll talk about 3 things to consider before making a webinar, and you'll learn about the 3 P's for creating a webinar, which are planning. We'll talk about defining your topic and what are the elements of your outline. We'll talk about preparation, how to prepare your presentation, the visual portion of the webinar, and your script or talking points. And finally, we'll talk about production. I'll share useful tips about shooting your webinar, equipments to use, and where to host and promote it. I will walk you through the exact steps I took to create this webinar. At this point, please feel free to grab a pen and paper to take notes or pause and play at any point. Let's get started. What is the definition of a webinar? There are many floating around, and we all have some kind of notion of what a webinar is. But let's look at this definition. A webinar, short for web-based seminar, is defined as a presentation, a lecture, a workshop, an educational or instructional session that is transmitted over the web using a video conferencing tool. Let me repeat that. It is defined as a presentation, a lecture, a workshop, an educational or instructional session. If it falls into any of these categories, then it's considered a webinar. There are different types of webinars out there, such as live webinars, and also recorded on-demand webinars. In this session, we will talk about recorded webinars, where you, as the expert, will talk about a specific topic or share tips and advice, just like I'm doing in this webinar. So there will be no live audience. There will be no interactions with questions and answers. Keep in mind that your audience will watch it at their own will and free time and can pause and exit at any time. The biggest challenge of creating a webinar is how to deliver an interesting topic in a short time frame without engagement and interaction with the audience. Because there is no live audience, your webinar needs to be interesting, useful, short, and to the point. Zoom fatigue is real, and we're all suffering from it. And creating captivating recorded webinars is a real challenge because of that. Stick to your carefully crafted outline and don't deviate from the topic. Also, use storytelling to make your presentation interesting. Include real life scenarios or examples that your audience can relate to on a deeper level. There are many great reads and tips online how to incorporate storytelling into your presentations. The truth is, while there are many fancy tools out there for recording and producing webinars, content is king. Your content doesn't only need to be interesting, it needs to be useful and worth your audience's time. Which brings us to the 3 most important questions to ask yourself before making a webinar. The 3 most important questions to ask yourself before thinking about making a webinar are: number 1, is the topic interesting, needed, helpful, useful to the intended audience? Is it worth their time? Offer something that you know it's needed, not because you think it's important. It's because you know that your audience think it's important. So knowing your audience is crucial. If you're not sure if the topic is interesting, send a survey and find out. Or pick a topic based on most frequently asked questions. Our attention spans are short, so offer something that is valuable to your audience. Question number 2, is the topic realistic to accomplish in the time frame? We all want to share a lot, and we only end up scratching the surface at the end. It will be unrealistic to say that in this webinar, you will be actually creating a webinar. It took me days to create this webinar from start to finish. Instead, you will gain understanding it and learn about useful steps for what it takes to create a webinar. Now, that's more realistic to accomplish in this time frame. And question number 3, what is the one most important key point or feeling your audience will gain from watching? I personally want you to feel more confident about creating webinars. I want you to have that feeling of, I can do this. So ask yourself, in terms of your webinar, is it to inspire or help make a decision? If your audience gets that one thing, this webinar will be a success. Now that we pondered on these important questions, let's move on and learn about the process of creating recorded webinars. In this final section, we'll talk about the 3 P's for creating recorded webinars. We'll talk about planning, preparation, and production. The first phase is planning and defining a topic. Decide from the start if your topic is instructional, informative, helpful, or inspirational. Is it to educate or present a new idea? Are you offering tips or advice? This should be the answer to what's the purpose of your webinar. Since this is a recorded webinar, you should also think of a topic that is timeless, evergreen, something that can help people now, but also in the future. So not something that is short term, because again, this is an on-demand webinar. Who is the webinar for? Who is the intended audience? Are they beginners? Are they intermediate or experienced in this topic? Understanding your audience is key here. The more you understand their needs, situation, life circumstances, and their knowledge base, the easier it will be to create and structure the content. And lastly, we all have a tendency to share a lot. It's only natural, but a lot doesn't always mean good. Get back to that one thing that you want people to get from your webinar. Go deeper versus broader. It's better to have a series of topics than lump them all in one webinar. So break the topics apart if you have more material than your time allows. It's better to have shorter webinars than one long webinar covering many topics. After defining our topic, we will start creating our outline. Your outline is your blueprint, your action plan, or your checklist, whatever works best for you. This is the time where you're going to map your content and action steps carefully. Your outline should have the following details. It should have the webinar title, learning objectives and outcomes, and breakdown of all the sections, points, and subpoints. Don't forget to plan for your call to action at the end. And since this is a recorded webinar without any engagement from the audience, consider offering your audience the option to post questions in the comments or to email you or reach out on social media. Phase 2 is preparation, writing a script or talking points. Some people like to write detailed script that helps them be in control. But because you will be on video, it does have to look natural. You don't want to sound scripted, right? But this takes practice. It's okay to pause, go off script. You don't have to read it verbatim. But if you're new to recording and being on camera, it's better to have a detailed script. We are not all born with improv skills. But as I said earlier, practice makes perfect. And the more you are on camera, the more natural it will feel. On the other hand, talking points are also great because they're not too constrictive, but still keep you on track with main key points. If you're a seasoned public speaker, feel comfortable, think of these like your speech notes. You can also have a hybrid approach with partial script and talking points. Should you write the script before, during, or after designing your presentation? I prefer to write first before designing the presentation, but you might find that the opposite works for you. You can even do this in parallel and write the script in the notes while designing the slides in PowerPoint, Keynote, or wherever you have your presentation. The key important here is really to find what works for you after trying different things. The second stage of preparation is creating a presentation, adding the text and visuals. I'm a believer that less is more. Just see the video thumbnail of the speaker, of me in this case for this video. It's small and it's usually in the upper right corner. So it's important that the slides are simple and that there isn't a lot going on. In Zoom and other programs, you can have the options to choose to have your video either next to the presentation or over the presentation. Next, you will design your slides. Decide on color and fonts. Stick to your branding style. My rule is not to use more than 2 types of fonts and colors. Again, you don't want the design to overwhelm your content. Add text and images. Make sure in terms of the images that they are your property or that they are copyright free. It's important to not overdo it. Again, less is more. People will either read or listen to you. This is no different than doing live presentations. So use text to emphasize your points, but avoid making your slides text heavy. Our final phase is production, shooting your webinar. I use my free Zoom account to record this webinar. What I did is I shared my presentation screen and I hit record. The end product looks just like this. You can research and decide on a different platform that better serves your needs. Really, go ahead and spend some time to see what's out there and what your competitors are using. But if you're just starting out or your budget is small or non-existent, there are many free platforms out there to record your webinars. Use a mic or a headset, just like I'm using here. Make sure you test it. Do a dry run. Make sure that you can hear and see yourself and that everything looks well on the screen before you start. For the camera, I use my laptop's camera. So just to summarize the equipment I use, it's my laptop's camera, and I use an external mic. When it comes to recording your webinar, my advice is to record section by section and pause in between. Since this is not a live recording, it's unnecessary to keep your energy up for the entire duration. Breaking it up will help you channel that energy better, and also you can reshoot parts if needed. But make sure you do practice runs. Practice, and take breaks in between. But also don't take it to extreme. Shoot a segment and move on quickly. Which brings us to not being a perfectionist. A couple of ums and ums are okay. We are human talking to another humans, even though we're recording this without a live audience. So just again, shoot a segment and move on quickly. The more you practice, the more you do it, the better and easier it will become. And lastly, hosting and promoting your webinar. Decide where you want to post it. You can upload your webinar on YouTube, on Vimeo, Facebook, wherever your audience is. I highly recommend you to include closed captioning. It is for the hard of hearing and also for those who prefer reading as a way of learning. Your viewers can turn the captions on and off. And if you host it on YouTube, YouTube can use speech recognition technology to auto-create captions for your videos. Think about your search engine optimization. Think about a catchy title, description, and tags for your webinar. How will people find you online? SEO is very important. And finally, think of where and how often will you promote it on social media, in newsletters, in emails, and any other marketing ways you use to promote your content. Let's quickly summarize what we just covered. We went over the definition of what the webinar is. We went over the 3 most important questions to ask yourself before thinking about making a recorded webinar. And we briefly went over the 3 Ps or phases of planning, preparing, and producing a webinar. Before we conclude, this is my advice to you. These are the key things to remember when creating your webinars. Quality over quantity. It's better to take your time and release fewer on-demand webinars that are effective and helpful than to focus on quantity. Don't focus on you, focus on your audience. Especially if you're new on camera, a lot of times you think about, how do I look? Do I sound okay? Instead of focusing on yourself, think about how are you helping your audience grasp the topic? How will the tips and advice help them? It's nice to have the pressure off yourself. And lastly, have fun doing it. Things might go wrong, and they probably will go wrong, and that's okay. Technology is tricky and it can be frustrating, but if we're laughing about it and having fun, things just go much easier. Now that you know what it takes to create your webinar, you can do this. It's not an easy thing to do, but with manageable steps, you can do this on your own or hire someone to help you either with the structure or help with the technical part of producing the webinar. Thank you for watching and for your time. Please feel free to connect or follow me on LinkedIn, link included on the slide, or find me on Twitter and Instagram at Lily Sirik. Thanks again, and now off you go to create that awesome webinar. Thanks, everyone.